Rain poured over the marble driveway of the Carson mansion, glistening under the morning sun. Reporters shouted, cameras flashed, and the iron gates creaked open slowly, revealing something that froze every soul in place. A young black girl, no older than 17, was walking barefoot across the driveway, carrying a little boy in her arms, frail, pale, and clearly disabled. Her dress was torn, her eyes tired but fearless. At the top of the stairs stood Richard Carson, the billionaire known for his ruthless business empire and cold heart. He had seen a million faces in his life, but none that made his breath stop like this, because the boy she was carrying was his own son. For a few seconds, the world seemed to go silent. The girl's arms trembled as she whispered, "I didn't mean to, but I had to save him." The crowd gasped. A journalist dropped her mic. Richard's security froze in disbelief. How could a street girl, someone no one had ever seen near the Carson estate, "Are you holding the billionaire's missing son like that?" Richard's voice cracked, anger mixing with confusion. "Who are you?" he demanded. "How do you have my son?" But the girl didn't answer. She looked him dead in the eye, her lips trembling as she said, "You don't remember me, Mr. Carson, but I remember every promise you broke." Lightning flashed across the mansion's roof as her words sliced through the morning air. What began as a scandal was about to uncover a truth that would destroy everything Richard thought he knew. Her name was Ava Monroe, a girl from the south side of Atlanta, where the air smelled like old concrete and broken dreams. She grew up in a neighborhood the city had long forgotten. Cracked pavements, flickering streetlights, and hope that came in small doses. Her mother worked double shifts at a diner, her father long gone. But Ava was different. Even as a child, she carried a sense of quiet strength, a strange maturity that came from surviving too much, too soon. Every morning before school, she'd help her mother wash dishes, whispering, "Someday, Mama, I'll buy you a big house. No leaks, no noise, no pain." But the world doesn't reward the ones who dream too softly. At 16, Ava dropped out of school to help her mother pay rent. She took whatever jobs she could: cleaning, babysitting, even running errands for strangers in expensive neighborhoods she could never afford to live in. That's when she first saw the Carson mansion. It was like another world. Tall white pillars, rose gardens, fountains that never stopped running. From the outside, it looked like heaven. From the inside, as she would later learn, it was something else entirely. One afternoon, Ava got a temporary housekeeping job at the mansion. She wasn't supposed to talk, wasn't supposed to be seen, just clean, then leave. But fate had a way of twisting rules, because that's the day she met Ethan Carson, the billionaire's only son. A frail boy in a wheelchair, with soft brown hair, and a laugh that sounded like sunshine. "Are you scared of me?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. Ava smiled gently. "No, baby. Why would I be?" He grinned, the first genuine smile she'd seen in days. From that day, Ava and Ethan became inseparable. She'd read him stories, sneak him chocolate, push him around the garden when no one was looking. For Ethan, she wasn't just a maid. She was freedom. Someone who saw him not as a fragile secret, but as a boy who still deserved to laugh. But in a house built on pride and appearances, love, even the innocent kind, was forbidden. One afternoon, Mrs. Carson saw them laughing together by the fountain. Her expression turned to stone. "Get that girl out of my house," she ordered the guards. "She doesn't belong here." Ava was thrown out, unpaid, unwanted, and unseen. But as the mansion gates closed behind her, she looked back at the window where Ethan watched her leave. Small hands pressed against the glass. That image burned in her memory, and months later, when the world would call her a liar, a thief, and worse, That same memory would be the reason she went back. Because some promises are too heavy to forget, even when the world tries to erase you. It had been 6 months since Ava was thrown out of the Carson mansion. 6 months since she last saw Ethan's smile behind that glass window. She'd tried to forget, to focus on surviving, to move on. But every night she'd close her eyes and hear his laughter echoing in her mind. That fragile voice, that fragile boy. Then one evening, as she wiped tables at the diner, the television above the counter caught her attention. Breaking news. Billionaire's son missing from Carson estate. Family offers $2 million reward. The world around her froze. The glass she was holding slipped from her hand and shattered. Ethan, missing? The anchor continued. Police believe the boy disappeared late last night. The garden fence found his wheelchair. No signs of forced entry. Ava's heart began to race. She didn't know why. She just knew something wasn't right. Her manager shouted, "Ava, you okay?" She nodded faintly, her mind already a storm. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her small apartment felt colder, darker. Every instinct screamed that Ethan was in trouble. And somehow, she knew where to start looking. The next morning, she packed her bag, threw on her hoodie, and took a bus across town, toward the same mansion that had thrown her out like trash. When she reached the gates, the place was surrounded by police and reporters. She stood at the edge of the crowd, unnoticed, her eyes scanning the property. Something about the story didn't make sense. The Carsons claimed Ethan had been asleep in his room, but Ava knew that wasn't true. Ethan's bedroom didn't have a window big enough for anyone to escape through. Then she saw it. A flicker of movement near the forest behind the mansion. A shadow. Small. Weak. Crawling. Her heart leapt. Without thinking, she ran. Past the crowd. Past the shouts. She pushed through the trees, her lungs burning, until she heard a sound. Faint crying. And there he was. Ethan. Mud-covered. Shaking. Clutching a torn blanket. His wheelchair was broken nearby. "Ethan!" she gasped, dropping to her knees. He looked up, dazed. "Ava?" She gathered him in her arms. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." He started sobbing uncontrollably. "They left me. I tried to call for help." "Who did?" she asked, panicked. But before he could answer, she heard voices. Men's voices. Searching through the woods. Security guards. She knew they weren't there to rescue him. If they were, they wouldn't have been shouting her name like that. Not in anger. Not in fear. Ava's instincts screamed run. She lifted Ethan into her arms, his body limp, his breathing shallow. Branches scratched her arms as she pushed through the woods, every step feeling heavier. Her heart pounded in her throat, but she didn't stop. Not even when she tripped and scraped her knees. Behind her, flashlights flickered. Voices grew louder. "Find that girl! She took him!" "Took him?" Her mind spun. Why would they say that? Why would they frame her? The only one trying to save him. She didn't have time to think. She just ran until the trees thinned and the city lights appeared again. And that's how the world saw her. A black girl, barefoot, bleeding, carrying a billionaire's son through the rain. By the time the cameras found her, it was already too late. Her face was on every screen. Her name dragged through every headline. Kidnapper or savior? The news asked. But Ava knew the truth. The real story wasn't what the world thought. It was darker, and it was just beginning. Rain kept falling that night, as if the sky itself was mourning what the world had become. Ava sat on the curb, Ethan's weak body wrapped in her arms. Sirens wailed in the distance. Headlights glared through the mist. "Put your hands where we can see them," a police officer shouted. Ava froze. Her eyes darted between the officers and the trembling boy in her lap. "He needs help," she cried. "Please, he's not breathing right." But no one moved. No one came closer. Instead, one officer whispered into his radio, "We've got the suspect." "Repeat, we have the girl. Suspect." That word hit harder than the rain. They handcuffed her on the wet pavement, right in front of the flashing cameras. Ethan tried to speak, but his voice broke into sobs. "Don't take her, please." "She didn't?" Ava's eyes filled with tears as the paramedics lifted him away. She screamed his name, but it vanished under the sound of sirens and shutters. By morning, every headline screamed the same story. Billionaire's son found with kidnapper. Who is Ava Monroe? Street girl or stalker? Reporters camped outside the police station, digging through her past, her neighborhood, her mother, even her school records. Every flaw became evidence. Every struggle became a motive. Inside the cold interrogation room, Ava sat under a buzzing light. Her hands trembled as the detective slid photos across the table. "Why did you take him?" "I didn't," she whispered. "Then how do you explain this?" The pictures showed her carrying Ethan, the exact moment the cameras had caught. Her hair wild, her face desperate, her arms around a billionaire's son. "I found him like that," she said softly. He was hurt, alone. The detective leaned forward. "You expect us to believe that?" She bit her lip. "I don't care what you believe. He needed me." Hours passed. The same questions. The same disbelief, until finally the door opened, and Richard Carson walked in. He looked colder than marble. Perfectly dressed, perfectly composed. The kind of man who'd never known hunger or mercy. When their eyes met, Ava felt the air leave her lungs. "Mr. Carson," the detective said, "we appreciate your cooperation." Richard's gaze didn't leave her. "She's the one," he said quietly. "She used to work for us. We fired her months ago. She's obsessed with my son." Ava's heart shattered. "No!" she cried. "That's not true. I saved him." He was— "Enough!" Richard snapped. The sound of his voice cut through her words like a blade. He turned to leave, his shoes echoing on the tiled floor. But just before stepping out, he looked back. And for a split second, she saw something in his eyes. Doubt. Fear. Guilt. Then it was gone. They kept Ava overnight. No lawyer, no phone call. By dawn, her name was everywhere, painted as a monster. Meanwhile, Ethan lay unconscious in a private hospital, sedated, unreachable, and behind every locked door, whispers grew louder. She did it for money. She wanted fame. She's dangerous. But truth has a way of surviving lies, even when buried under a million voices. 2 days later, a nurse who had been on duty the night Ethan arrived recognized Ava's name on the news. Something didn't add up. The boy had been covered in bruises, old ones, not from a single night. She remembered how he had flinched when the doctor touched his arm. She filed a quiet report, off the record. It was ignored. Still, the seed of doubt had been planted. And in a city full of secrets, even a whisper can grow into a storm. Back in her cell, Ava sat alone, staring through the bars at the small square of sky. She whispered to herself, "I don't care if they call me a thief, a liar, or worse. I want him safe." For a brief moment her eyes hardened, not with fear, but with fire. The kind of fire that comes from pain too deep to run from, because Ava Monroe was done surviving. Now she was going to fight. And the next time the world looked at her, they'd see the truth. The morning sunlight slipped through the cracks of her cell window, pale and uncertain, like a guest afraid to enter. Ava sat on the edge of the metal cot, tracing invisible lines on her palms. Her eyes were swollen from sleepless nights, yet something inside her refused to break. The sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. The guard opened the door. "You've got a visitor," he said flatly. Ava frowned. "Who?" He didn't answer. Moments later, a woman in her mid-30s stepped into the room. Sharp suit, calm eyes, and a voice that carried quiet authority. "My name is Rachel Pierce," she said, setting down a folder. "I'm an attorney." "Pro bono." Ava blinked in confusion. "Why are you helping me?" Rachel hesitated before answering. "Because I saw the footage, and I don't believe everything they're saying about you." For the first time in days, Ava felt her chest loosen. Someone, a stranger, didn't see her as a villain. Rachel pulled out a few papers. "There are inconsistencies in the reports. Your fingerprints weren't on the window, the timeline doesn't match the Carson's statement, and—" She flipped a page. "Ethan's injuries didn't happen in one night. They were older." Ava's heart pounded. "You mean someone was hurting him?" Rachel nodded slightly. "That's what it looks like. But proving it, that's another battle." Silence hung heavy between them. Then Ava whispered, "If I go to trial, will anyone believe me?" Rachel leaned forward. "Maybe not yet. But the truth doesn't stay buried forever. You have to survive long enough for it to come out." Ava looked down, tears welling. "They took everything from me." Rachel smiled faintly. "Then let's take something back." That night, back in her cell, Ava couldn't sleep. Her thoughts raced, memories of Ethan laughing, calling her Super Ava as she pushed him through the garden. She could almost hear his voice again. "You promised you'd never leave me." "I didn't," she whispered into the darkness. "I came back." Somewhere deep inside, the girl who had once only survived began to breathe again. Her fear was still there, but beneath it, a quiet strength started to rise. The next morning, when the guards came for her, she stood taller. Her chains clinked against the floor, but her eyes no longer looked down. Because for the first time in a long time, Ava had hope. And hope, once lit, doesn't go out easily. Not even in the darkest cell. 3 days later, the courtroom was packed. Cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters whispered like vultures circling prey. Ava sat beside Rachel, her wrists free but her heart still caged. Richard Carson sat across from her, calm, controlled, eyes of stone. Between them, an ocean of silence. The judge called the hearing to order. "This is a preliminary review of the charges against Ava Monroe," he said. "Miss Pierce, you may proceed." Rachel stood, her tone steady. "Your Honor, we request that all medical and household records related to Ethan Carson be made public. My client's actions were not a kidnapping. They were an act of protection." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Richard's lawyer stood immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. Irrelevant and speculative." But before the judge could respond, Rachel held up a photograph. This was taken by a hospital nurse the night Ethan was admitted. Note the bruises. Different colors. Different healing stages. "These are not from one incident," murmurs spread. Reporters scribbled. Richard's expression didn't change, but his hands tightened around his pen until it cracked. Rachel continued. "And according to hospital logs, the boy's mother, Mrs. Carson, refused to let doctors run a full abuse evaluation." The courtroom went dead silent. Then a voice broke the stillness. "Objection sustained," the judge said carefully. "Ms. Pierce, unless you have direct evidence, I do." Rachel placed another document on the table, an email printed in black and white. It was from one of the mansion's maids. Subject line, "I can't stay quiet anymore." The message described nights of shouting, locked doors, and a mother who drank too much. A child is crying. A staff too scared to speak. The letter ended with one line that made the whole room hold its breath. The only person who ever protected that boy was the girl they fired. Ava's chest tightened. Tears blurred her vision as she gripped the edge of the table. Across the room, Richard's lawyer whispered something urgently in his ear, but the billionaire didn't respond. He was staring at Ava now, really staring, as if for the first time he was seeing her beyond the headlines. The judge cleared his throat. "This hearing will be suspended until further investigation." The gavel came down. The room erupted in chaos, reporters shouting, cameras flashing, guards escorting Ava out. Outside, the air felt different, heavy, but with a new kind of weight, the weight of truth trying to break free. Rachel placed a hand on Ava's shoulder. They'll dig deeper now. If we're right, the Carson secrets won't stay hidden long. Ava nodded slowly. But inside her, something else was stirring. A storm of emotions she couldn't name. That night, as she lay awake in the small holding cell, she replayed Richard's expression again and again. Not anger, not disgust, something else. Regret. And for the first time she wondered, maybe he didn't know. Maybe the man the world called heartless was blind to the truth that lived under his own roof. The next morning, the headlines had changed. Was the billionaire's son abused? The House of Secrets. What really happened inside the Carson estate? For the first time, Ava's face wasn't painted as a monster, but as a mystery the world couldn't stop talking about. Rachel sat across from her in the small visiting room, a stack of files between them. They reopened the case, she said quietly. But that means they'll come after us harder. Ava frowned. Who's they? Rachel sighed. The Carson legal team, and whoever they're protecting. Just then, the door opened. A guard stepped in. Ms. Monroe, you've been granted temporary release under supervision. Ava's eyes widened. What? Rachel smiled faintly. You're coming home. When Ava walked out of the detention center, the city felt both bigger and smaller. Cameras followed her every step, microphones shoved in her face. But she didn't speak. Not yet. Rachel drove her to a safe house on the edge of town. Inside, stacks of documents covered the table. Financial records, staff statements, and photos that didn't belong in any loving home. Ava stared at them, her heart sinking. Rachel, if this gets out, people will hate them. Hate him! Rachel looked up. Do you hate him? Ava hesitated. I don't know. She remembered the boys' laughter, the warmth of the mansion's garden, and the day she saw Mrs. Carson's eyes. Cold, distant, dangerous. Rachel flipped a page. Here, this was hidden in an encrypted folder. Someone tried to delete it. Ava leaned closer. It was a security log, time-stamped the night Ethan disappeared. It showed the code to the back gate being entered at 2:13 a.m. By Mrs. Carson's ID card. Ava's throat went dry. She opened the gate, she whispered. Rachel nodded. And someone else covered it up. Ava sank into the chair, trembling. So she tried to get rid of him? Rachel didn't answer right away. Sometimes, people like her don't see their children as children. They see them as imperfections. The room fell silent. Outside, thunder rolled again. That same kind of stormy night when everything began. Ava clenched her fists. She's not getting away with it. Not after what Ethan went through. Rachel's eyes softened. If we go after her, we go after the Empire too. Richard Carson won't stand by quietly. But Ava shook her head. Then he'll have to choose between the truth and his pride. Meanwhile, across the city, inside his penthouse office, Richard stared out the window. The skyline glittered beneath him, but for once, it didn't make him feel powerful. On his desk lay the same photo that Rachel had shown in court. Ethan's bruises. Old. Layered. Proof. He closed his eyes, and memories flooded back. His wife's cold remarks. Ethan's silent fear. The way his son would flinch whenever she touched him. He had seen the signs. He just hadn't wanted to believe them. Sir? His assistant's voice broke the silence. The board's on line 1. Richard didn't move. Because for the first time, the billionaire who had built an empire couldn't buy peace with money. He picked up his phone instead, not to call the board, but to call the hospital. I need to see my son, he said quietly. Later that night, Ava stood outside the hospital gates, hidden beneath her hoodie. Rachel had warned her not to come, but she couldn't stay away. Through the glass, she saw Ethan lying there, tubes, monitors, machines breathing for him. She pressed her hand to the window. "I'm still here," she whispered. "I promised I'd protect you." A voice came from behind her. "You already did." Ava turned, and there he was. Richard Carson. He looked older, quieter, not the man from the courtroom, but a father who'd finally seen what he refused to see before. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Richard said softly, "You were right. I didn't know. I didn't see it. I should have." Ava's voice trembled. "He trusted you." Richard's eyes filled with guilt. "I know." He looked through the glass again. "She's gone. She left the country this morning. Took everything she could." Ava stepped closer. "And Ethan?" "He'll live," Richard said. "But the scars, they'll take time." Silence hung between them. Heavy, but not hateful. Two worlds that had collided through pain, now bound by the same truth. Then Richard whispered, "I want to make things right. For him, for you." Ava looked away, tears blurring her vision. "You can't fix the past, Mr. Carson, but you can stop running from it." That night, as lightning flashed again over the city, both of them stood in silence. A billionaire and a girl from the South Side, two people who should have never met, connected forever by a child who needed saving. And somewhere deep inside that hospital room, Ethan's fingers moved. The morning sun filtered through the hospital blinds, thin and uncertain. Ava hadn't slept. She sat in the hallway outside Ethan's room, her head resting against the cold wall. Rachel arrived quietly, 2 coffees in hand. "You've been here all night," she said softly. Ava nodded, her eyes fixed on the door. "He moved his fingers," she whispered. "He's coming back." Rachel smiled faintly. "Then maybe justice will wake up with him." Just as she spoke, Richard appeared at the end of the hallway. No security, no press, no arrogance this time. "Only a man carrying the weight of too many lies, Ava," he said quietly. "There's something you need to know." She stood slowly, cautious. Rachel tensed beside her, ready for another fight. But Richard didn't look angry. He looked broken. He handed Rachel a folder. "I found these in my wife's private safe. She'd hidden them for years." Rachel opened it. A stack of adoption records, hospital files, and letters. At the top of the pile was one photograph, a young woman holding a baby. Dark skin, familiar eyes. Ava froze. "That's..." Richard nodded. "That's your mother." Her world tilted. "What are you saying?" she whispered. Richard's voice trembled. Something it had never done before. "Before I met my wife, I had a relationship. Short, secret, wrong in the world's eyes back then. Your mother worked for my company. He stopped, swallowing hard. "When she got pregnant, I panicked. I paid her to leave quietly. I never saw her again." Ava's breath caught. Her knees went weak, her voice a whisper. "You're saying—" "Yes," Richard said, tears threatening. "You're my daughter." The hallway fell silent. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights felt distant. Ava stumbled back, her mind spinning. She thought of all the times she'd stood outside his mansion, invisible to him, and all the years he'd lived just miles away, never knowing, never looking. Rachel stared at him in disbelief. "You knew she worked for you? You never tried to find her?" Richard's jaw tightened. "I thought I was doing the right thing. But I see now. I destroyed 2 lives that day." Ava's voice cracked. "You destroyed more than that." Tears blurred her vision as the truth sank in. Ethan wasn't just the boy she'd saved. He was her half-brother. She pressed her hand to her mouth, shaking. "All this time, all this pain. It was family." Richard stepped forward slowly. "Ava, I can't change what I did. But I want to make it right. For you. For Ethan." She looked at him. The man who had unknowingly ruined her mother's life. The man she'd once hated more than anyone in the world. Her heart ached with 1,000 conflicting emotions: rage, sorrow, forgiveness. Finally, she whispered, "You don't fix something like that with money. You fix it by facing it." Richard nodded, his voice raw. "Then that's what I'll do." He turned toward Ethan's room, staring through the glass at the boy sleeping peacefully. "I wasn't there for either of you when you needed me, but I will be now." Ava stood beside him silently. The war between them had ended, not with victory, but with truth, and sometimes that's all it takes to begin healing. The steady beep of the heart monitor echoed through the room. Ethan's fingers twitched again, stronger this time. Ava stood by the bedside, eyes wide, as his eyelids fluttered open. He blinked, confused, weak. "Hey, sunshine," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're safe now," Ethan's lips parted. "Ava?" Tears ran down her cheeks. "Yeah, it's me. I'm right here." Richard stood frozen near the doorway, watching. The billionaire who had spent a lifetime surrounded by power was now powerless before the sight of his children together. Ethan turned his head slightly, eyes finding his father. "Dad?" Richard took a hesitant step forward. "I'm here, son." Ethan frowned, confused. "Where's Mom?" The room went quiet. Even the machines seemed to pause, waiting for an answer. Richard swallowed hard. "She's gone, Ethan. She won't hurt you again." A shadow crossed the boy's face. Fear, then relief, then exhaustion. He turned back to Ava, his voice fragile. "I told her you'd come for me." Ava smiled through her tears. "And I did. I always will." Rachel, standing quietly near the door, looked away. Even she couldn't hold back her tears. This was no longer just a case. This was a family rebuilding itself from ashes. But outside the hospital walls, the world was already moving. Cameras, headlines, talk shows, all demanding the same thing: the truth. And Richard knew, this time, he couldn't hide behind money or reputation. That evening, he called a press conference. The same mansion where it all began now stood as the stage for redemption. Reporters filled the courtyard, their flashing lights casting a gold and white glow on the marble walls. Richard stepped up to the podium. No suit, no arrogance, just a man with weary eyes. Ava and Rachel stood behind him. He cleared his throat. "For years, I believed that wealth could protect me. From guilt, from truth, from the consequences of my own blindness." The crowd fell silent. "I was wrong." He paused, letting the words hang. "My son, Ethan, was not kidnapped. He was rescued by a girl I once turned away. A girl who, by fate or by grace, turned out to be my own daughter." Gasps erupted. The reporters leaned forward, microphones thrust out. Richard continued, voice steady now. "I failed as a father twice, but today, I want the world to know that I am done hiding behind walls of pride." He turned toward Ava, his eyes soft. "She is the reason my son is alive. And from this day forward, she will never walk alone again." Ava's throat tightened. She hadn't expected this. Not so soon, not so publicly. She stepped forward, facing the cameras, her heart pounding. "I didn't save Ethan for fame or money," she said. "I saved him because someone had to care, and no one else did." Her voice trembled, but her eyes held firm. "I grew up thinking people like us didn't belong in places like this. But I learned something. Truth doesn't care where you come from. It only cares that you stand for it." The crowd was silent, not out of shock, but respect. Rachel watched from behind, proud, knowing this moment would echo far beyond headlines. Richard stepped closer to Ava and placed a hand on her shoulder. Together, they faced the cameras, not as billionaire and maid, not as accuser and accused, but as father and daughter, bound by pain, rebuilt by truth. Later that night, the mansion felt different. The air was lighter. The silence is softer. Ava walked through the halls that had once rejected her. The same marble floors, same chandeliers. But now, the ghosts were gone. In Ethan's room, she found him awake, smiling weakly. He held out his hand. "Can we read again?" Ava laughed, pulling up a chair. "Only if you promise not to fall asleep halfway." Ethan grinned. "I'll try." She opened a book, The Little Prince, the one they used to read in secret. Her voice filled the room softly, words flowing like old memories. Richard stood at the doorway, listening. He didn't interrupt. He just watched. His son alive. His daughter reborn. For the first time in decades, he felt something money could never buy. Peace. Hours later, when Ava stepped out into the garden, the night was quiet. The fountain sparkled under the moonlight, the same one where she and Ethan had once played. Rachel joined her, hands in her pockets. "You did it," she said. "You got your truth," Ava smiled faintly. "Truth doesn't always heal, Rachel, but it gives you a place to start," Rachel nodded. "What will you do now?" Ava looked up at the mansion's glowing windows. "Stay. Not because I owe them, but because Ethan deserves someone who'll never leave again." Inside, Richard stood by the window, watching her. The daughter he'd never known. The proof that even the richest lives can still be redeemed. And in that quiet moment, under the soft hum of the night, it was no longer about guilt or forgiveness. It was about beginning again. Because sometimes, redemption doesn't arrive in grand gestures. It comes in whispers, in a girl's promise, and in a boy's fragile smile. Weeks passed. The world moved on, as it always does, chasing new headlines, new scandals. But for the Carsons, life had slowed down. The mansion no longer buzzed with servants or social events. The laughter that filled its halls now came from something simpler. Ethan's giggles, Ava's stories, Richard's quiet attempts at being a father again. Ava often sat by the garden fountain, the same place where everything had once gone wrong, and watched Ethan learn to walk again. The doctors had said he might never regain full strength, but Ava never stopped believing in him. "Come on, champ," she'd say, smiling. "Just one more step." Ethan would wobble, stumble, then laugh as she caught him. From the porch, Richard watched them, his eyes filled with both joy and regret. For years, he had measured success in dollars and empires. Now, it was measured in moments. A smile, a shared laugh, a second chance. One afternoon, as the sky blushed gold, he walked out to join them. Ethan had fallen asleep on the grass, a book clutched to his chest. Ava looked up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "He's getting stronger," she said softly. Richard nodded. "Because of you," she smiled faintly. "Because of truth." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. Then Richard spoke quietly, almost to himself. "You know, when I was your age, I thought love was weakness. Showing care made you vulnerable. So I built walls. Around my house. Around my heart." He looked at her, eyes glistening. "But you tore them down without even trying." Ava's voice was soft. "Love isn't weakness, Richard. It's what makes you fight." He nodded slowly, as if the truth had always been there, waiting for someone to say it out loud. That evening, Rachel came by with papers. The last of the legal mess finally resolved. No charges, no media threats, just freedom. As she packed her briefcase, she smiled at Ava. "You've got a life ahead of you now. Whatever you do next, make it count," Ava nodded. "I will, for my mother, for Ethan, for me." Rachel paused, then looked at Richard. "You too, Mr. Carson. Maybe try living like the world isn't watching for once." He gave a quiet laugh. "I think I'm finally learning how." That night, the three of them had dinner together, something that would have seemed impossible months ago. No cameras, No reporters. Just a family rediscovering what that word meant. Ethan sat between them, poking his vegetables with dramatic disapproval. Ava laughed. Still not a fan of broccoli? He grinned. Never will be, Richard chuckled softly. Stubbornness runs in the family, I guess. Ava looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, she saw not the billionaire, not the man who broke her mother's heart, but a father trying to become something better. Later, as the house fell quiet, Ava stood alone on the balcony. The city lights sparkled beyond the hills, 1,000 tiny dreams glowing in the dark. She thought about where she'd come from, the cracked pavements, the sleepless nights, the hunger, the hopelessness, and she realized she hadn't escaped that world. She'd transformed it. Her pain had become her purpose. Her scars had become her story. Behind her, Richard stepped out, holding a photo. The one of her mother. She was stronger than I ever was, he said softly. Ava took the photo, her fingers brushing the worn edges. So am I. They stood together in silence, the wind carrying the faint sound of Ethan's laughter through the hallways. Sometimes redemption doesn't come in applause or forgiveness. Sometimes it comes in the quiet understanding between two broken people that they can still choose to be better. Ava turned to Richard. You know, for a long time, I thought I was cursed, that everything I touched turned to pain. He looked at her gently. And now? She smiled. Now I know pain doesn't define you. It refines you. The wind carried her words out into the night, soft, steady, and accurate. Because in a world obsessed with power and wealth, it was the girl with nothing who had given everything, and taught them all what humanity really means. The night air was calm. The city below shimmered like a sea of fireflies, restless, beautiful, alive. Ava stood on the balcony of the mansion that once symbolized everything she'd never have. Now, it wasn't about walls or wealth anymore. It was about peace. Ethan slept soundly upstairs, his laughter still echoing faintly in the halls. Richard sat by his bedside, whispering stories instead of stock prices, finally learning what mattered. And Ava, for the first time in years, breathed without fear. She looked up at the stars, the same ones she'd watched as a child from a broken rooftop on the south side of Atlanta. Back then, she would talk to them and ask them questions. Why me? Why this life? Why the struggle? Tonight, she didn't ask. She whispered, "Thank you." Because the struggle had made her who she was. It had carried her here, not as a victim, not as a survivor, but as someone who turned pain into purpose. Weeks later, she started a small foundation, the Monroe Promise. It helped children from underserved neighborhoods access medical care, education, and a voice. Her first goal was to ensure that no child would ever be invisible again. Reporters came again, of course. They wanted to call her a hero. She didn't let them. "I'm not a hero," she said. "I'm just proof that kindness still works." Sometimes, the most powerful stories aren't about those who rise to fame, but those who rise to forgiveness. Ava no longer needed the world's approval. She had found her peace in the one place she never thought she would. The truth. And truth, no matter how painful, always sets you free. As the screen fades to black, her voice lingers, steady, soft, cinematic. People think money builds walls, but it also builds prisons. I broke mine the day I stopped waiting for someone to save me, and became the one who did. The final shot lingers on her silhouette, standing under the stars, the mansion lights glowing behind her. The city stretches far beyond the horizon. A breeze lifts her hair, and she whispers one last line. A line that feels like it belongs to everyone who's ever been broken and still chose to stand tall. Sometimes, family isn't what you're born into. It's what you fight for. At Hidden Struggles, we go deeper, where emotion meets evidence and drama reveals the system. If this story made you pause, reflect, or feel something, don't forget to subscribe. There's more to come.